All right, welcome. I thought for a beginning delve into this, we would take a look at sort of a bird's eye view of roughly the 1,000 years or so of Old Testament history. Really, 1,500 years, I guess. We're going to briefly cover the emancipation of Israel from Egypt. But really, that period of time, just getting its geographic underpinnings leading up to the time of the New Testament. Okay, so we can sort of just situate our bearings. And then what we do once we do this is then we will take a worm's eye view, that is, take a closer look at particularly the period we're going to be studying, which is really spans about 3 or 4 centuries or so. Okay, really beginning with the divided monarchy under the northern kingdom in Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, and the various struggles of these two nations to assert themselves against hostile powers to the north and to the east. Okay, but let's begin here, and you can see where my cursor is pointing out Egypt. Egypt is, of course, the mighty civilization which flows along the River Nile. In fact, if you go to Egypt today, it's basically a desert, except right along the Nile, you'll see a lush strip of very arable land. This was a great and mighty civilization in antiquity. Okay, it's sort of fallen off its high horse in the modern age for a variety of reasons, but we see that Egypt's power waxes and wanes in antiquity as well. Okay, of course, when Israel ends up in Egypt, Israel's emancipated from Egypt, fleeing across the Sea of Reeds, which is probably right here where my cursor is, somewhere around there. We don't know exactly where it took place. And then into the area of Canaan, which you see my cursor is pointed to now. Okay, the area of Canaan is, of course, where the broader area of which the Philistines live and the various other tribes, but this is the area in which David, in around the year 1000 BC, or actually a little before that, was able to consolidate a kingdom, okay, under God's patronage. Okay, then as you turn to the north of this, you see the area which the map calls the area of the Arameans, the territory of the Arameans. This is biblical Aram. Okay, Aram is centered around the city of Damascus, which is not on my map, but we'll look at another map shortly in which we will see it in greater detail. This is the area which is also called Syria. Okay, and of course in modern Syria today, as we would expect, centers its capital in Damascus. Okay, the Arameans are a mighty power as well, and of course the language Aramaic, which Jesus speaks, ultimately derives from the Arameans. The Arameans were sort of the cultural heavyweights in the 1,000 years or so in this part of the world before the Hellenization, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Okay, but those are the Arameans. Okay, so biblical Aram, you think of that, think of the area immediately north of Israel. It's basically Syria. Okay, now, heading to the east, okay, we see that there are two great empires which we will be dealing with in our course. The first is they're both centered around Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is, of course, literally the Greek term for land between two rivers. Okay, the two rivers being the Tigris and the Euphrates. Mesopotamia is the area between them, and of course there's a mighty civilization along both the northern part of Mesopotamia and the southern part. Okay, the northern part of Mesopotamia sweeps into what is now northern Iraq, okay, and a few pieces of other countries as well, but basically northern Iraq. But back in that time, it is known as Ashur, okay, which they would call themselves, but we would call them today Assyria, okay, or the Assyrians, okay, and Assyria becomes a mighty power pushing on Canaan, both the Arameans and the Canaanites, that is Israel, from the east. Okay, they arise first. The date usually given for their rise is the 9th century or so BC. So 9th century, we're talking around 800 BC. Okay, we begin to see the Assyrians rise. Well, the Assyrians have their great heyday in the 8th century. In the 7th century, they begin to decline. To make a long story short, which we'll talk about in more detail later, they are conquered by the Babylonians, who are the other mighty empire in Mesopotamia, in southern Mesopotamia, also located in what's now Iraq. Okay, they are headquartered here, where my cursor is. Their great cities are, of course, Babylon itself, the most famous, but also Ur of the Chaldees. Okay, the Chaldean is another term for Babylon. Okay, these are terms you want to be aware of in the biblical lexicon. This will help your reading of Scripture a lot if you can understand the various terms. Okay, Assyria, Babylon. Okay, Babylon is also called Chaldea. Abraham is said to be from Ur of the Chaldees. Okay, so Abraham was originally an Iraqi, interestingly enough. So this empire becomes mighty as well. And of course, this is the empire which finally does in the Davidic kingdom, centered in Jerusalem in Canaan. Well, sure enough, of course, Babylon falls, and Babylon falls rather quickly to Persia, to the east, okay, which is also known in the Bible as Elam. Okay, Elam, Persia, they're both areas that are now called Iran. They're further to the east. I don't have the word Persia here, but that's the area here where my cursor is. The Persians eventually conquer both the Babylonians, okay, and they push further and further west, ultimately to conquer all the way to the area of Sinai. They don't actually pursue very far into Egypt. That area stays more or less independent. Egypt is actually very difficult to conquer, but they remain in control for several centuries. Okay, now eventually in the very late 4th century, that is the very late 300s, you see the Greek Empire beginning to rise. Okay, and they are, of course, to the west here, where my cursor is. Hellas is actually the Greek word for Greece. They are really headed by Alexander the Great, who technically is not a Greek at all, but is from Macedonia, which is the area of northern Greece, up here, where my cursor is. Eventually, Alexander gets the idea to fulfill the dream of his father Philip, who Philip was never able to accomplish, and that is to conquer all of Asia Minor, which is this area here, which is now known as Turkey, to go through there and ultimately to crush the Persian Empire and in effect take over its lands, which of course he's able to do. And this begins the great process of Hellenization. He's able to very much in the centuries after that begin the process of spreading Greek language and Greek culture, Greek thought, Greek customs. All of these have a profound influence on the area of Palestine. From the point of view of biblical history, it's very important because this program of Hellenization ultimately prompts a revolt under the time of the Maccabees. This is around the 2nd century BC, before the time of Jesus Christ. The Maccabees resist Hellenization. They recommit Israel to a rigorous program of keeping the laws of Moses and resist other aspects of Hellenization as well. But of course, there eventually the Hasmonean reign, the Hasmonean Empire eventually is conquered by King Herod. King Herod, of course, is a Roman vassal in effect, but of course is more than a vassal. He's a very, very shrewd and ambitious and wealthy politician, and really sets the stage for an Israel that is largely headed partly by Herod, but really is the person who's doing the bidding for Rome. Okay, and this pretty much leads us into the time of Jesus himself, which is a rather complex set of circumstances in which part of the area of Jesus is governed by Herod and the various tetrarchs. You know, when Herod dies, he divides the kingdom into 4 pieces, giving each of his sons share of it. But the one over Palestine, the tetrarch's not able to handle it, and he's ultimately replaced by the Roman governor, who at the time of Jesus was named Pontius Pilate. Okay, and so you see how this leads us into our times. Okay, well, with that, let's actually now take a closer look at what happened to lead up to this. Okay, so we've kind of gone through about 1,000 years of history in just a few minutes. Now let's kind of go back and look at it more slowly. Okay, so I will meet you here in the next video.